My name is Sam Garrett. I'm 66 years old, and I spent 40 years building other people's houses. I was a home builder, started out swinging a hammer for other men, and by the time I was 40 I had my own crew, my own company, and I built houses all over the Ohio Valley. Good houses. Big ones, some of them, the kind with the two-story foyer and the kitchen you could land a plane in. I built other people's dreams for a living, hundreds of them, and I was proud of the work. A man made a good honest wage giving families a place to grow up in. But I'll tell you a thing I never told a soul on any of those job sites. In 40 years of building homes, there was one house I could never build. One I lost when I was 17 years old, and spent the rest of my life trying to put back up out of 2x4s, and never could, because it wasn't a house I'd lost. It was a whole world, and her. My wife was Helen. We were married 34 years, and she was patient and kind, and she deserved better than a man with a locked room in him. But she got me anyway, and she made a fine life out of what I could give. She passed 3 years ago now, and after she was gone, and the kids were grown and scattered, and I'd sold the business and had nothing left to do but rattle around a big house I'd built with my own 2 hands, I found I couldn't stop thinking about the little house I grew up in. A house 400 miles away in a played-out coal town in the hills of West Virginia that I hadn't laid eyes on in near about 50 years. Slate Fork, that's the town. And the house was on Chestnut Street, and it was small and plain, and it had a crooked front porch my daddy built. And it was, without one word of exaggeration, the happiest place I have ever been in my whole long life. 4 bedrooms would have been a mansion to us. We had 2 and 6 people, and I wouldn't trade a night of it. I've built houses since with wine cellars and elevators, and not one of them held a candle to that little house on Chestnut Street on a summer evening, with my mother singing in the kitchen. We lost it when I was 17. The mine cut back, and then it closed, and my daddy lost his work like half the men in Slate Fork did, and the bank took the house, and we packed what fit in a borrowed truck and moved north to Akron, so my father could get on at the tire plant. That was how it went for a lot of us hill families back then. You didn't choose to leave, you got pushed out, and the mountains just closed up behind you like water. And when we drove out of Slate Fork that gray morning, I left behind more than a house. But I'll get to her. Let me tell you first about the foolish thing I did this past spring. I was online one night, the way a lonely old man is, and I don't even rightly know what made me do it, but I typed in the address, Chestnut Street, Slate Fork, West Virginia, just to see. And up it came. A real estate listing. My house, my little house, 50 years older, the porch sagging worse than I remembered, the paint gone to gray, the yard grown up in weeds. Bank owned again, all these years later, nobody wanting it. Going for less than I'd spend on a decent truck. And something came over me that I have never been able to fully explain. I sat there at that computer at 2 in the morning, 66 years old, and I bought my childhood home back. Just like that. Didn't sleep on it. Didn't ask my kids. Who'd have thought I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. I just bought it. The one house I'd never been able to build, and there it was, and I could finally have it back. I told myself I'd fix it up. That's what I did, after all. I'd restore the old place, make it right, maybe keep it as a place to get away to. That's what I told myself. The truth was I was a grieving old man chasing a ghost, and some part of me knew it, and I got in my truck and drove 400 miles south anyway. Before I tell you what was waiting for me on that porch, let me say a word to you, friend. If a story like this is finding the tender part of you tonight, if you know what it is to ache after a place or a person you lost a long time ago, do an old man a kindness and tap that like button and subscribe if you would, because I tell one of these every week and I believe you and I are the same kind of homesick. There's a question I mean to ask you at the end, and I truly want your answer. Now let me tell you about coming home. The drive took the better part of a day, and the last hour of it took 50 years. The roads got narrower, and the hills got closer. And then I came around a bend, and there was Slate Fork laid out in the hollow, and my chest did something it hadn't done in half a century. But the mine works were long gone, just a scar on the mountain where the tipple used to be. Half the storefronts on Main were boarded, but the church was still there, and the creek, and the shape of the hills against the sky. That particular shape I'd have known anywhere, the shape that had been the walls of my whole boyhood. I drove up Chestnut Street with my heart going like a jackhammer, and I came to the house, and there was somebody sitting on my porch. I slowed the truck to a crawl. An old woman, sitting on the porch steps of a house I'd bought and nobody was supposed to know I'd bought. Silver hair, a blue dress, like she'd dressed for something. Her hands folded in her lap, and she was watching my truck come up the street, the way you watch for something you've been waiting a long, long time to see. I stopped. I got out. My legs didn't hardly work. And she stood up off those steps, slow, and she put a hand up to her mouth. And even across 50 years and 40 feet of weedy yard, I knew her. God help me. I knew her before I could see her face clear. I knew her from the way she stood. Sadie Marsh. The girl I'd loved on that porch when the world was young. The girl I'd left behind in the borrowed truck 50 years ago, with my heart tearing loose from its roots. "Hello, Sam," she said, and her voice shook. "I heard somebody bought the old Garrett place, and then I heard the name on the deed." She had tears standing in her eyes. "I've been coming to sit on this porch and wait every afternoon for a week because I couldn't believe it, and I had to see with my own eyes if it was really you. Let me take you back now, so you understand what it meant. An old woman waiting on that porch. Sadie Marsh lived 2 doors down from me on Chestnut Street, and I loved her from about the age of 6, though I didn't have the word for it till I was 15. We grew up running these hollows barefoot, her and me, catching crawdads in the creek. And somewhere in there, it turned into something else, the way it does. By 16, we were sweethearts, the real kind, the only kind that ever marks you that deep, because it's the first, and you've got no scar tissue yet to protect you. And that porch, that crooked porch my daddy built, that was ours. My father hung a swing on it, a plain board swing on 2 chains, and Sadie and I spent every summer evening of our young lives on that swing. We'd sit out there after supper with the lightning bugs coming up out of the yard, and the whole holler going blue and then dark, and we'd swing slow and talk about the life we were going to have. We were going to marry. We were going to build a house right here in Slate Fork, a better one, and raise our own babies in it. I was going to be a builder. I already knew it, and I told her I'd build her the finest house in the county with my own 2 hands. She had a way of tucking her feet up under her on that swing and leaning her head on my shoulder, and I swear to you, I can still feel the exact weight of it, 50 years later, like my shoulder never forgot the shape of her. Her mama would call her home when it got full dark, and she'd go, and every single night she'd stop at the bottom of the steps and turn around and look back at me one more time before she ran off down the street. Every night. 50 years I have been trying to build a house nice enough to earn back that one look over the shoulder, and I never could, because you can't build a look. You can only be lucky enough to get it, and I'd had it, and I'd let it get away. One evening on that swing when I was 17, I took out my pocket knife and I carved our initials into the doorframe, right there beside the front door, into the soft old pine, SG and SM, with a heart around them and the year underneath. And I told her it was a promise. I said, long as that's there, Sadie, I'm yours. You can always know it. 3 weeks later, the mine closed. I have never in my life felt anything like the morning we drove away. My daddy had his jaw set like stone, and my mama cried the whole way to the county line. And I sat in the bed of that borrowed truck on top of everything we owned, which wasn't much. Sadie stood in the road in front of her house in her nightgown, not caring who saw, and she ran alongside the truck a little way, and then she couldn't keep up, and I watched her get smaller and smaller through the back window until the road bent and she was gone. And she turned, right at the last, and looked back at me over her shoulder one more time, the way she did every night. That's the picture I carried for 50 years. Her, standing barefoot in the road, looking back. We were 17. We had no money, and no telephone, and no power on this earth to stop it. I wrote her from Akron, and she wrote me back, and for a while the letters flew. But we were children, and we were poor, and the miles were long, and there was a new life pressing in on me up north, and a new one on her down here. The letters came slower, and then, the way it does, they stopped. It wasn't anybody's fault. That's the cruelest part of it. Looking back, there was nobody to be angry at, just poverty, and distance, and time. 3 things that have parted more true hearts than all the villains in the world put together. I married Helen. Sadie married a Slate Fork boy named Gordon, and stayed right here in the hollow her whole life. We each built a life out of what we had, and they were good lives, and I'd not spit on them. But I never forgot that porch, or that swing, or the girl I'd promised myself to with a pocket knife when I was 17. I just locked it up, the way you do, and I carried the key around for 50 years. And now she was standing in front of me, an old woman in a blue dress, on the porch where I'd made that promise. We sat down on those porch steps together, the two of us, because the swing was long gone and the porch itself wasn't safe to stand on much. And we talked. Lord, how we talked. Gordon had passed 5 years back, she told me. A good man, a coal man, black lung got him in the end, the way it got so many. She'd raised 3 children in Slate Fork and buried a husband in it, and she'd never once left the hollow, not for more than a trip to Charleston. She asked about my life, and I told her. About Akron, and learning the building trade off a hard old German who taught me everything. About starting my own company, and the years it near broke me, and the years it made me. About Helen, and how good she'd been, and how I'd never quite given her all of myself, and how I'd carried that guilt to her grave. About my 2 kids, and my grandbabies out in Ohio. I laid my whole 50 years out on those porch steps, and Sadie listened the way she'd always listened, with her whole face, nodding along, and when I got to the part about Helen dying, she reached over and put her hand on my arm, and it was the first time in 3 years anybody's touch had reached all the way down. You did fine, Sam, she said. You did fine with the cards you got dealt. We both did. Did we? I said. I don't know, Sadie. I look at you sitting here, and I think about 17, and I think about the house we said we'd build right here, and I can't help but do the arithmetic on what we lost. Don't, she said gently. Don't you do that arithmetic. It'll drive you crazy. I did it for about 20 years, and it near about ate me alive. We didn't lose it, Sam. It just got put off a while. Turns out a while can be 50 years. She smiled, and there were tears in it. But here you are, on the porch. So I reckon it wasn't lost after all. Just late. I asked her the thing I'd been afraid to ask. Why'd you wait on the porch, Sadie? A whole week. You could have just called the realty office. And she got a look on her face then, a look I can't quite describe, tender and a little scared, and full of 50 years. Come inside, she said. There's something I have to show you, and I've been waiting 50 years to show it to the right person. I want to stop here a moment, friend, because this next part is the heart of the whole thing, and if you've stayed with an old builder this long, you've got a good heart yourself. If this story's reaching you, please tap subscribe so the next one finds you. And tell me down in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. And here's the question I've carried ever since that afternoon on Chestnut Street. Is there a place or a person that you lost a long time ago and never quite stopped grieving? I'd give a great deal to hear about it. Now let me tell you what she showed me inside that house. The door wasn't even locked. She pushed it open, and we stepped into the ruin of my childhood. Plaster down off the ceilings, floors buckled, the smell of 50 years of damp. It should have broken my heart, and it did, a little. But Sadie didn't stop in the front room. She took my hand, the first time she'd touched me in 50 years, and she led me through to the doorway between the front room and the kitchen, my mother's kitchen. And she stopped, and she put her finger on the doorframe, and she said, "Look." I looked, and there in the soft old pine, worn but plain as the day I cut it, was SG and SM, with a heart around them, and the year underneath. 50 years, a dozen families, paint and paper and remodels and ruin. And our initials were still there. I couldn't understand it. I ran my thumb over those grooves my own 17-year-old hand had cut, and I looked at Sadie, and I couldn't get a word out. I made sure, she said, and now the tears were coming down her face. Every family that ever bought this house, Sam, I'd go and introduce myself, neighborly, and somewhere in the visit I'd take them to this doorframe, and I'd tell them the story, about the boy who carved it and the girl he promised, and how the mine took him away. And I'd ask them, please, whatever you paint, whatever you tear out and put back, leave this one little mark. And do you know, in 50 years, not one family ever painted over it, not one. They'd have their children, and they'd bring them to this doorframe and tell them the story I told them. This whole town knew about these initials. There's grown men and women all over this county who learned about faithful love standing right here, looking at your pocket knife promise. She wiped her face. I couldn't hold on to you, Sam, but I could hold on to that. So I did. For 50 years, I did. I put my hand flat against that doorframe, next to the mark, and I wept like the boy who'd made it. 50 years. She'd guarded a promise I made her when we were children, guarded it through a dozen strangers and half a century, because she never once stopped believing it meant something. I never forgot you either, I finally got out. Sadie, I built 400 houses and I never built the one I promised you, and I think that's why. I think a man can't build the same house twice. I think that's why I bought this one back. I wasn't chasing a house. I was chasing that swing, and that summer, and you, and I didn't even let myself know it till I saw you standing on those steps. She reached up and laid her hand against my face, the way she used to when we were young, and she said, "You want to know the truth, Sam? Every family I ever told about that door frame, I'd tell them the boy carved it and the mine took him away, and every one of them would say the same thing. They'd say, 'Do you think he'll ever come back?' 50 years, folks asked me that, standing right here. And you know what I told them? Every single time?" Her voice broke. I told them, "He carved a promise into this house. And a man who'd do that is a man who comes back. Might take him his whole life, but he'll come back." She was crying now, and smiling through it. I was the only one who never stopped believing it. And this week, when I heard your name on that deed, I got to be right. After 50 years, Sam Garrett, I got to be right. That undid me worse than the doorframe had, because it's one thing to be waited for. It's another thing to find out somebody defended your promise to a whole town for half a century and staked her own hopeful heart on it, and turned out right in the end. I'll be honest with you about what came after, because it wasn't all doorframes and tears. We were two old people who'd each had a whole other life. There were hard evenings in the weeks that followed, sitting on folding chairs in that gutted house while I worked on it. Word had gotten around the hollow fast, the way it does, that Sam Garrett had come home and bought the old place, and that he and the widow Marsh were seeing about each other. And the town, that dwindled, weary, boarded-up little town, took to it like nothing I'd ever seen. Folks I hadn't laid eyes on in 50 years started dropping by the house while I worked, bringing casseroles and cold tea and old stories. And more than one of them, I found out, had grown up hearing about that doorframe. A woman near my age named Ruth Ann, whose family had owned the house back in the 80s, brought her granddaughter by one afternoon just to show her the initials, and she said, "Mr. Garrett, I told this child the story of these letters when she was no bigger than a minute. She thinks you're about the most romantic thing that ever lived." And that little girl looked up at me like I was somebody out of a book, and I had to go stand in the yard a minute and get a hold of myself. 50 years I'd thought that promise died in a borrowed truck. Turned out it had been alive this whole time, passed hand to hand through a whole town, kept warm by one faithful woman. She'd loved Gordon, and I'd loved Helen, and we had to make room for the fact that we weren't the two kids on that swing anymore. That 50 years had made us into strangers, who happened to share the deepest root a person can have. There was an evening I got scared, the way I always got scared. And I told her maybe I was just a grieving old fool who'd bought a house to chase his own boyhood, and maybe I ought not drag her into a sad old man's nostalgia. And Sadie Marsh looked at me and said, "Sam Garrett, I have driven past that doorframe every week for 50 years. If this is nostalgia, then I've been sick with it since Nixon was president, and I'd like to be sick with it a while longer, with you, if you'll quit talking foolishness." And that settled that. Because here's the thing I finally understood, standing in the wreck of my mother's kitchen with my hand on a 50-year-old promise. I didn't come back for the house. The house was just the box the real thing came in. I came back for the part of me that got left behind in that borrowed truck. The part that still believed a boy could promise a girl forever and mean it. And it turned out that part of me had a keeper. Sadie had kept it safe, in a doorframe, for half a century, waiting for me to come home and claim it. So I did the only sensible thing a man in my position could do. I rebuilt the porch first, before the roof, before the floors, before anything. I tore off the rotten old boards and I built that porch back solid and true, the finest porch in the county, with my own two hands, the way I'd promised her I would when we were 17. And I hung a swing on it, a plain board swing on two chains, just like my daddy's. And Sadie and I are to be married this fall, on that porch, on Chestnut Street, in the house where I first loved her. We'll sit half the town down in that weedy yard, and we'll say our vows right next to the doorframe, so the whole thing can be under the same roof, the promise and the keeping of it, 50 years apart, and finally in the same afternoon. We'll live here. I'm making the old place better than it ever was, though I'm leaving plenty of it just exactly as it was. Because some things you don't improve, you just honor. The door frame stays, of course. It'll never be touched as long as I'm breathing. And I've already told my kids it's to stay when I'm gone. And I've told them the story, and now they'll tell it, the way this whole town has told it for 50 years. I keep a picture of Helen in the front room, and Sadie keeps one of Gordon, side by side on the mantle. They were good to us when we couldn't be good to each other, across all those miles and years, and we'll honor them as long as we live. There is room in a house, and room in a heart, for everybody who ever loved you true. I believe that with everything I've got. Most evenings now, we sit out on that new swing, Sadie and me, with the lightning bugs coming up out of the yard and the holler going blue and then dark. Just exactly like we did when the world was young. We're gray now, and slower, and there's 50 years of other lives behind us. But the swing sways the same. And I'll tell you, sitting out there of an evening, I can't hardly tell the difference between being 17 and being 66. Love doesn't seem to know how to count. It just picks right up where you left it, like it was only waiting on the porch the whole time for you to come back. So here's my question for you tonight, and I mean it with my whole heart. Where are you listening from, and is there a home somewhere in your past, a place or a person or a promise that you've never stopped aching for? Don't you assume that door is closed. Don't you assume it's too late. I sat down at a computer at 2 in the morning, half out of my mind with grief, and bought a falling down house 400 miles away, and it turned out to be the best thing I ever did, because the girl I promised at 17 was sitting on the porch waiting. Tell me down below. I'll be reading every single one. This is Sam Garrett, from a porch on Chestnut Street in Slate Fork, West Virginia, that I finally came home to, telling you the truest thing I know. Some promises just wait for you, patient as an old house, till you're brave enough to come back and keep them. Good night.